All right, everybody, and we are back today talking about none other than the Chicago Bears. Now, this will be our first team discussing in the NFC North Division, and just to give a little bit of background on where we've been with the Chicago Bears here, it really has been a rough go about for this franchise recently. This is a team that has missed the playoffs technically only the last two seasons. They did make it to Super Wildcard Weekend in the 2020 NFL season as the seventh seed, although if you really start to look back here, they haven't won a playoff game since 2010, only making the playoffs one other time besides 2020, that being when they won the NFC North in 2018. And you really look big picture, besides that 2010 and 2006 season where they went all the way to Super Bowl 41, they haven't won a playoff game since 1994. So definitely a franchise that's been starved of postseason success. And of course, as we look at the 2022 Bears now, this was a team that finished dead last in the National Football League with a 3-14 record, of course being last in the NFC North as well. So we won't spend too much time on the 2022 Bears since it was just such a miserable season for them, but we can look down here at their schedule. Interesting because they did start off with that massive upset over the San Francisco 49ers, one of the best teams in the National Football League last year. And then even as we got down here to week 7 when they defeated the New England Patriots 33-14, they were only at a 3-4 record. Then they would go on to lose their next 10 in a row to finish 3-14 with an 0-6 record in the NFC North. Never a recipe for success. Looking a little bit down here further, obviously a player we're going to be talking about a ton in this video is none other than Justin Fields, and this is definitely a player who is certainly going to have to prove himself this year. I know there's definitely a lot of excitement about Justin Fields right now in the NFL offseason, certainly in fantasy football circles because of his rushing statistics primarily, and we'll take a glance at his rushing stats in a second here, but talking about Justin Fields strictly as a passer, really nothing overly impressive here. 15 games started for the Chicago Bears last year, posting a 3-12 record as a starter. Just 2,200 passing yards with 17 touchdowns and 11 interceptions. So really nothing earth-shattering here. Really nothing overly impressive. I would say that's probably a below-average stat line for, excuse me, below-average stat line for a quarterback. Looking at the overall quarterback statistics last year, it'd be difficult to say that he would even be a top 20 passer, strictly passer. Of course, when you combine the rushing ability, it definitely elevates him a little bit in the hierarchy of NFL quarterbacks. But for a second-year player, you really need to start to see some more progression than this, and the Bears are definitely going to be looking for that this year, as we'll see. Now looking at the rushing statistics for the Bears, and to no surprise, Justin Fields leads the way here with over 1,100 yards rushing and 8 touchdowns in just 15 games played as a quarterback, which, I mean, yes, that's definitely very exciting for the Chicago Bears, definitely very exciting for Justin Fields, very exciting for NFL fans watching him zip around all over the field, but you really don't want to see that if you're a franchise like the Chicago Bears. You'd really like to see Justin Fields develop more as a passer. You'd like to see him delegate the rushing responsibility more to these running backs, which, granted, they did. David Montgomery and Khalil Herbert combined for over 1,500 yards, so you can't be upset with that at all. But when you finish with a 3-14 record, you definitely have to start looking at what's going wrong here. And while, yes, this is a very impressive stat line rushing-wise for Justin Fields, it makes their offense definitely more one-dimensional. You would like to see him develop more as a passing quarterback. So I'll take a quick glance here at their receiving statistics, and it's definitely reflected where they only have one receiver over 500 yards last year, that being their tight end, Cole Kmet, with really no receivers over 600 yards here, which is very concerning for a team that is looking to have their franchise quarterback take another step. Last year and now especially this season, they're looking for him to take that next step. And we will look at the Bears' 2023 offseason here in a second. They have certainly invested heavily in this offense, but Cole Kmet's also the only player here with more than 3 receiving touchdowns. In fact, the only other player with more than 2 receiving touchdowns was a running back, that being, oh, I'm sorry, that's actually a receiver, Dante Pettis. I don't know why I thought that was David Montgomery. So 0 wide receivers, though, with more than 3 receiving touchdowns, which is certainly concerning to look at. And moving along down here, we'll quickly just look at their defensive statistics. Really nothing overly impressive here. Only 2 players with more than 5 tackles for a loss. Their leading sack producer last year was actually a safety with 4 sacks, Jaquan Brisker. And then if we could look at forced fumbles, again, a safety leading the way here with 2, Eddie Jackson, no other player with multiple forced fumbles. And we want to look at interceptions. Eddie Jackson, again, leading the way with 4. So not bad at all. They're actually able to generate quite a few interceptions here. Although Roquan Smith was moved at the deadline last year to the Baltimore Ravens, as we discussed in that video. So I think that's enough about the misery of the 2022 Bears. We really don't need to waste too much more time on this tire fire of a team. So let's look ahead to what the Bears did this offseason. So like we saw before, this is via over the cap. And on the left here is the 2022 team that these players were on, with the right-hand column being the team they're playing with in 2023. So the Bears did bring these players back here in this middle column. We really won't need to delve too deeply into that. And then over here is the percentage of snaps that the player played with their 2022 team on the field. So let's look at some of the players that the Chicago Bears lost here. So some of the notable players that they lost would be Al-Quadin Muhammad, an edge rusher that has departed to the Indianapolis Colts. Also included in this list, I'll put in Nicholas Moreau, played actually nearly 100% of defensive snaps for the Chicago Bears last year and was probably one of the more underrated players on that defense last year. Definitely was somebody who had a nose for the football. And he actually departs to the Philadelphia Eagles. Although I will say, we'll look at a second here, the players the Bears acquired this offseason, but I will mention one right now. They effectively swapped Nicholas Moreau for TJ Edwards of the Philadelphia Eagles. So definitely not a bad swap if you're the Chicago Bears, although if you look at the money involved here, Nicholas Moreau had actually 0 guaranteed money when he signed with the Philadelphia Eagles, whereas TJ Edwards is signed for around $6.5 million a season. So definitely, if you're looking just from strictly a cap point of view, the Philadelphia Eagles benefited from that, although TJ Edwards is probably the better player. And Chicago does have more cap flexibility, as we will see later on. So not a bad move by Chicago, on Chicago's part by any means. So before we get into more of the acquisitions, let's look at some of the other guys that they lost here. Their starting running back, David Montgomery, departs to the division rival Detroit Lions, where he figures to be part of more of a committee. Definitely great move for Detroit, I would say. While not the end of the world for Chicago, they should still be okay at running back, but David Montgomery really was one of the only major producers on that not Detroit Lions. He will be on the Detroit Lions this year, on the Chicago Bears offense in 2022. So like we saw with some of these other teams with rushing quarterbacks, the Baltimore Ravens, the Buffalo Bills, I really find it fascinating how these teams with the mobile quarterbacks really kind of refuse to invest in the running back position. Whereas I feel like that would really help out the mobile quarterbacks. It would really help, one, make them a better passer. It would open up more passing opportunities for them, with defenses having to account for a strong rushing attack as well, which, just looking at it from a schematic point of view, there's only 11 guys on the field. So if opposing defenses see that the Chicago Bears have a rushing threat like David Montgomery in the backfield, you would think they would need to have more defenders commit to that possibility, and that would leave more passing lanes open for Justin Fields. That just seems very logical to me, but what do I know? I'm not an NFL coach nor an NFL executive. So looking at some of the other players here that the Chicago Bears lost, Riley Reiff, their starting right tackle, he's been in the league for a long time now, formerly of the Detroit Lions. He moves on to the New England Patriots. Not a bad pickup by any means for the New England Patriots, but as we will see later, why do I keep on saying the Detroit Lions? The Chicago Bears do address this by bringing in another right tackle to replace Riley Reiff this offseason. So nothing that's the end of the world by any means there. And then finally, the only other player I will note here is Sam Mustipher, their starting center last year, who actually moves on to the Baltimore Ravens. I didn't mention him in the Baltimore video, although he will be a backup on that offensive line behind Tyler Linderbaum, who has quickly established himself as one of the better young centers in the NFL. So I am very high on the Baltimore Ravens offensive line, and a move like this definitely only reinforces that concept because this is a player, while granted the Chicago Bears didn't have a good offensive line by any means last year, this was a player that started 98.7% of their offensive snaps last year. So certainly somebody who can stay on the field and is willing to eat big minutes. So eat big minutes, talking like this is basketball, but he is somebody who will definitely be able to rotate in for the Baltimore Ravens and provide them some stability if things do go awry with Linderbaum at center. So, not a bad move there for the Ravens by any means, but definitely a little bit perplexing for the Chicago Bears. So now let's look at some of the players the Bears brought in this offseason to alleviate some of those losses. Obviously, they had the whole edge rusher losing Muhammad to the Indianapolis Colts. And like with the Philadelphia Eagles in the linebacker swap, they effectively trade him for, where is he at here? Yannick Ngakoue. So he was signed only age 28 and played 64% of snaps for the Indianapolis Colts last year. Definitely one of the cooler names in the NFL, but he's also somebody who can produce as well. He has a known track record of being a very solid edge rusher in the NFL, so definitely a good pickup by the Chicago Bears there. Somebody that should give them some stability on the defensive line, a good veteran presence who's been around the block. Some of the other players we'll note here, already mentioned TJ Edwards of the Philadelphia Eagles. I'll throw in Robert Tonyan as well from the Green Bay Packers. Their starting tight end the last several seasons now. He's always been a nice safety blanket option for them. Really not one of, I wouldn't say he's quite a top 10 tight end in the NFL, but he's certainly very close. But you have to keep in mind this is a franchise in the Chicago Bears who already has Cole Kmet as their franchise tight end, and I would say he is a top 10 tight end in the NFL. So bringing in Robert Tonyan as a second option, definitely not a bad move at all. And I will also give a shout out to Mercedes Lewis here, who they also brought in from the Green Bay Packers, technically as a third string tight end. I don't know if that's as strong of a move because you typically would like a tight end on your roster further down the depth chart to be more of a blocking option. Although he is age 39, so the jury is still out if he even makes the team, but perhaps even just having that veteran presence around a young quarterback like Justin Fields will be a strong asset for them. So finally, I will mention one more player here, and that is Nate Davis from the Tennessee Titans. And he was right guard for the Titans last year, played 65% of snaps, and he figures to be the Chicago Bears starting right guard this year. So definitely a good move to alleviate losing their starting center on the offensive line. And actually, you know what? I'll give another shout out here to Deontay Foreman, who very well could be the Chicago Bears starting running back this year. He filled in for the Carolina Panthers last year, definitely saw a increase in volume after they moved on from Christian McCaffrey. Chuba Hubbard did as well, but it was definitely a back and forth between those two players last year. So Deontay Foreman could definitely be somebody to look out for as a potential replacement for David Montgomery, although I do think big picture that's probably a slight step back in terms of production at the running back position. I think David Montgomery is definitely one of the running backs who gets slept on across the NFL in terms of really being one of the more notable running backs. He does seem to produce year in and year out, so I would definitely say that's a slight downgrade going from David Montgomery to Deontay Foreman, but we'll see. The jury's still out on that. And then one more player we will mention here. This wasn't actually a free agency signing, but of course have to mention DJ Moore coming in here via trade with the Carolina Panthers. Chicago Bears, because they did have the worst record in the NFL last year, held the number 1 overall selection, and they ended up trading back, of course, to the aforementioned Carolina Panthers, who moved up to select Bryce Young, and one of the assets they acquired in that trade package was DJ Moore, who figures to be their number 1 wide receiver this year. Moving on now, we will look at the Chicago Bears 2023 draft class. So when all was said and done, they did end up trading that 9th overall pick to the Philadelphia Eagles to move back 1 spot to 10th overall. Philadelphia moving up to select Georgia defensive tackle Jalen Carter, where Chicago moves back, collects an additional fourth-round pick in 2024, and they select Darnell Wright, who is an offensive tackle and figures to be their starting right tackle this year. Now we look at the rest of this Chicago Bears draft class, and really after selecting Darnell Wright, they really double down on the defense here for the most part. They do select a couple skill position guys here in the fourth round, but other than that, it's all defense the rest of the way, which is interesting for sure. Chicago's plan, big picture, is definitely something I was trying to get a grasp on by looking at this, really this whole video, just looking at their offseason and their season last year, and their future assets, their future salary cap. And this definitely seems like a team that, in terms of the big moves and their big acquisitions, they really want to put Justin Fields in the best position possible to succeed for the season. That definitely includes drafting a player like Darnell Wright who can provide him some protection. That includes making the trade for a guy like DJ Moore, gives him a solid weapon. Even looking back to last season when they traded for a guy like Chase Claypool, who we'll look at a little bit more as we get to the depth chart here. But then in the background, they're kind of also trying to put some young talent on this defense. So maybe in hopes that, okay, if Justin Fields isn't the guy next year in 2024, they could potentially put themselves in a position where they could move up to select a new franchise quarterback, still have some young talent on that defense, and obviously have a good supporting cast on offense already in place. Definitely a little bit reminiscent of the Philadelphia Eagles last season with Jalen Hurts. I know that is a player Justin Fields has been compared to a lot, not just because they're both mobile quarterbacks who wear the number 1, but also just in terms of how these teams are being constructed around them and what the expectations have been of them. Because this time last year, the Philadelphia Eagles really weren't sold on Jalen Hurts as the long-term starter, and Jalen Hurts did take them to the playoffs in 2021, whereas Justin Fields was the leader of the worst team in the NFL last year in 2022. And we'll delve a little bit more into the depth chart here, which honestly, this is probably as good a place to as any. Before we do that, I will mention I find it interesting that besides Darnell Wright and Justin Fields, the Chicago Bears do not have any of their former first-round picks on the roster right now. Roquan Smith no longer with the team. No first-round picks in 2019 or 2020 thanks to the Khalil Mack trade. No 2022 first-round pick thanks to moving up for Justin Fields. Mitchell Trubisky obviously no longer with the team. Leonard Floyd now with the Buffalo Bills. Kevin White, colossal bust, who I was a fan of when they took, but I will gladly admit I was wrong on that. Kyle Fuller, no longer with the Chicago Bears. And then after that, nobody who's even in the NFL anymore. So definitely been poor drafting on the part of the Chicago Bears. And you hope that that changes here with Darnell Wright. Hope that they get this pick right, no pun intended. But that's where the team building really starts. And that's definitely something you could attribute to a huge symptom of why they finished last place in the NFL last year. They're just not bringing in the young talent that these other teams are right now. But they are slated to have 2 first-round picks next year, which will certainly help out. And we could take a quick glance at this here before we really get into the depth chart. They get the 2024 first-round pick from the Carolina Panthers via that trade to move down from number 1 overall last year, as well as a future second-round pick from Carolina. And they do have the Philadelphia Eagles 4th-round pick next year from that trade to move down from 9th to 10th overall, just switching those picks. But this does put Chicago in a strong position to potentially move up for another franchise quarterback if Justin Fields doesn't prove to have a strong season this year and doesn't look like the long-term solution. Although, if he does have a breakout season like Jalen Hurts did, they could be in a strong position like the Philadelphia Eagles were this past season, where they mostly have the roster in place, but they have 2 first-round picks to really just be an exclamation point on that. Obviously, Philadelphia's roster is a lot further along than Chicago's, but I see the mindset they're of right now. I see where their head's at in terms of loading up on future assets just as kind of an insurance policy. So enough about the future of the Chicago Bears, the past of the Chicago Bears. Let's really delve into this 2023 roster. So I'll start out with the Our Lads depth chart here like we have been looking at, although This week, teams have been putting out their first unofficial depth chart, with this being the first week of preseason games. I will reference the Chicago Bears unofficial depth chart as well here, although still very early in the preseason. A lot of these spots are absolutely up for grabs, so take everything here with a grain of salt for sure. So, breaking down the positions here, as we mentioned, Justin Fields figures to be their starting quarterback. Really not much of a debate there. They do bring in P.J. Walker from the Carolina Panthers to be a backup. Noticed a lot of former Carolina Panthers on this roster, which is interesting. And then the interception machine himself, Nathan Peterman, as the third stringer here. Fingers crossed for Bears fans, he doesn't get to see the field this year. So looking at the running back position, we have a competition going on right now between Khalil Herbert and Deontay Foreman. Although when all is said and done, I do expect both of these guys to produce in more of a committee type setting, as more of a tandem. We saw last year with David Montgomery and Khalil Herbert, both of those guys getting north of 700 yards, especially paired with Justin Fields rushing as well. When all said and done, Fields, Herbert, and Foreman probably have very similar statistics on the ground this year. And then we do have to give a shout out to the rookie here, Roschon Johnson. Maybe he ends up getting some reps here if an injury happens to Foreman or Herbert, which with the track record of Bears running backs the last few years, that's definitely a possibility. So can't count out Johnson there in terms of somebody who could see some notable time on the field this year. Tight end seems like a position the Bears are very strong at. It seems like that's been the case for a few years now, but it doesn't really mean much if you're not strong at other positions as well. We'll go through it anyways. They do have Cole Kmet, who one of the better younger tight ends in the National Football League, now entering his fourth season. Chicago did just sign him to an extension this past offseason, so he figures to be a part of this thing for a while here. Definitely a good safety blanket option for Justin Fields. And as we mentioned earlier, they bring in two tight ends from the Green Bay Packers, Robert Tonyan and the old man himself, Mercedes Lewis. So Chicago's very deep at the tight end position. Definitely not a bad thing to have for a young quarterback. Tight ends are always a nice safety blanket for them. So Justin Fields is scrambling outside the pocket, and he just needs somebody open 10 yards down the field to pick up that first down. These are going to be his guys. Now looking at the offensive line here, so they do have Braxton Jones, fifth-round pick last year, who actually played pretty well, all things considered. Definitely one of the better rookie offensive linemen last season, especially considering he was a fifth-round draft pick. And he figures to be their starting left tackle for the foreseeable future. Potential diamond in the rough draft pick there by the Chicago Bears. So if he could turn out to be a productive starter for them long term, that could be absolutely massive in helping them turn this thing around. Because if you have stability there at the left tackle position, and now drafting Darnell Wright to play the right tackle position, you're already putting Justin Fields in so much better of a position than you did last year. Now they have Cody Whitehair as their center, player they drafted back in 2016 in the second round, so he looks to step into that role with his name's already escaping me, Sam Mustipher leaving to the Baltimore Ravens. So Cody Whitehair could step in and produce as the offensive line, starting center there, and if he's able to produce again, that could definitely be a huge asset for the Chicago Bears. And as we mentioned with their free agent signings, they bring in Nate Davis to bring some stability to that right guard position. And then at left guard, they do have Tevin Jenkins, the third-year player, so another up-and-comer. I will also give a mention to Alex Leatherwood here. He was a former first-round pick in 2021 of the Las Vegas Raiders, although they selected him to be more of a tackle, and they moved on from him during the preseason last year. But Chicago swooped in and took him off of waivers and now have him playing guard. So if a potential injury happens on the offensive line, I'd be interested to see how Alex Leatherwood would produce, or even in more of a rotational type of role, just giving them some depth there. He definitely could be somebody who could give them an edge with his size at the guard position, so definitely look to keep an eye on that. Moving on to wide receiver. Of course, as we mentioned, they bring in DJ Moore and Chase Claypool via trade. Moore in the offseason at the draft, and Chase Claypool during the season last year. Still have Darnell Mooney hanging around, as well as Equanimous St. Brown, formerly of the Green Bay Packers, and the rookie Tyler Scott. And even the second-year player here, Velus Jones Jr., third-round pick last year. And even Dante Pettis currently on the non-football injury-related list, but say some sneaky depth here at the wide receiver position, and definitely looking to be a much stronger unit now that they have a solidified number one option in place with DJ Moore. Once you get that number one guy, the rest of the wide receiving core really just seems to work itself out, and that's with any NFL team really, because it's always never a good thing when you have guys playing a role higher than they probably should be. But DJ Moore is your number one receiver. Okay, that opens up more opportunity up for Darnell Mooney and Chase Claypool. Though Chase Claypool has definitely had some concerns during his time in Pittsburgh. Definitely some engagement issues, I guess I would say, and that was part of the reason why Pittsburgh moved on from him. Although he is an absolute physical specimen, so if he is able to turn things around on the mental side of the game, really learn this offense and learn to be a player Justin Fields can rely on, he could definitely be a player who's in Chicago here long term. Moving on now to the defense. So one thing I will say is that Chicago does very much value the linebacker position. Another one of these teams that seems to value the linebacker position. Really aren't too many of them left in the NFL right now. Chicago is one of them, though, along with the Baltimore Ravens and the Buffalo Bills. And I would definitely attribute that to their head coach himself, Matt Eberflus, who used to be a linebackers coach himself. So definitely a reason why Chicago is so keen on investing heavily in the linebacker position. Although there is a battle going on right now at this Sam linebacker position between Jack Sanborn, as we see here, and Noah Sewell, who I don't even know if I see him on the Our Lads depth chart here. See if he's on the Bears depth chart. So he's listed here on the Bears official depth chart, or unofficial depth chart rather. He's competing with Jack Sanborn at Bears camp right now for this starting linebacker spot, and reports are coming out that Noah Sewell actually does have the inside track for this position right now. But of course, still several weeks of camp remaining, 3 preseason games to go still, so the jury is still out on that position battle. Oh, here he is, listed as a Mike linebacker, rookie in the 5th round this year. So if he could compete for this spot here, and he's showing some strong signs at camp, definitely something that is worth looking at, because their head coach, like I said, used to be a linebackers coach. So if he has a strong vote of confidence in Noah Sewell, he could be a potential game changer for them, especially paired with Tremaine Edmonds as the Mike linebacker from the Buffalo Bills. Definitely going to provide some strong leadership and stability for this defense as a whole. Really could be the captain of this defense if he really wants to be, because it's just so wide open right now. This defense is very much a blank slate for the most part. And then they bring in TJ Edwards for the weak side linebacker position from the Philadelphia Eagles, as we mentioned earlier. Looking at the defensive line, this is definitely one of the weaker units in the NFL for sure. Not really too much up for debate here right now. There are some debates going on as to how this rotation will shake out. Although, look at the Bears' unofficial depth chart. Really isn't too much different from what Our Lads has listed here. Yannick Ngakoue should start, with considering they just went out and signed him in free agency this offseason. Justin Jones, Andrew Billings holding down the middle, with DeMarcus Walker starting opposite on the outside, although they do have 2 young players here they drafted for the interior of the line in the 2nd and 3rd round, so Chicago definitely aware that this is an area of improvement for them. Certainly had one of the weaker, if not the weakest, defensive line in the National Football League last year. And then finally, we will look at the Chicago Bears secondary for this year. Really not too much of investment here in the offseason, although I will mention there is a competition going on for this left cornerback position, which was probably the only place they did seriously put some investment in. They drafted both Tyreek Stevenson and Terrell Smith here. So as of right now, there is a training camp battle going on between these 2 players. Terrell Smith has been battling injury, although Tyreek Stevenson was their second overall pick. Second round pick rather, in this past year's draft. As of right now, Terrell Smith does still have the inside track as what's being reported out of camp, although would not be surprised at all if Tyreek Stevenson is able to hold on to this job by the time the season starts. rounding out the secondary, these were honestly some of the stronger players for the Chicago Bears last year. So Jaquan Brisker and Eddie Jackson, fully expect them to be the starting safeties, and Jalen Johnson starting as the opposite corner, with Kyle Gordon, their second round pick from last year, starting in the nickel. So definitely not a unit that strikes a ton of fear into you as an opposing offense, although they definitely seem to be trying to at least build this thing back up. Added a couple solid veterans this offseason. A few of them actually, Yannick Ngakoue, of course, Tremaine Edmonds, and TJ Edwards. And then even drafting several players here for both the secondary, linebacker, and the defensive line all around. So there is an influx of young talent coming into this Bears defense. If the coaching staff is able to develop these younger players into productive pros, I mean, maybe this Bears defense could be on more of an accelerated track here. Definitely a far cry from the unit it was just a few years back with Khalil Mack, Roquan Smith and company, and Kyle Fuller. So, looking ahead now to the Bears' 2023 schedule, I currently have the Bears projected to finish 5-12, which would be a slight improvement from last year. Wouldn't really be putting themselves in a position for the NFC playoffs, although it would be a slight step forward for them. I can't imagine Chicago does worse than last year. They were the worst team in the NFL. Were the worst team in the NFL last year, as we mentioned, with a 3-14 record. So if they could improve to, where are they at here? They can improve to 5-12. I mean, you take that where you can get it. You take the victories where you can get them, but definitely not the worst thing in the world. And if they are able to, you know what? I believe I actually had them finishing 0-6. I was tinkering around with this earlier. So I had them as 4-13 in the division with an 0-6 record. Though I was messing around with this earlier. If they were able to win a few of these divisional games, they could put themselves in a position to at least be competitive in the NFC North. So right away, with the 2-4 record, they would improve to 6-11. If they're able to win 3 of those games by some stretch, they would improve to 7-10 and be just a couple games out here from winning the division. I mean, who knows? If they are able to just focus on winning these divisional matchups, by some miracle they're able to sweep Detroit, they could theoretically find themselves at the top of this division just by improving their divisional record. Although I don't believe that to be the case at this point in time. As of right now, I do have them projected to go 0-6 within the NFC North, finishing with a record of 4-13. So Chicago's a team that I think really this season's all going to be about Justin Fields. It's going to be about, can he learn the offense? Is he going to be able to take that next step as a passer? Is he going to really be able to improve himself in terms of leading this team through the air? Is he going to be able to utilize DJ Moore as a receiver? Is he going to be able to get this team some noticeable improvement? That's really going to be the big question, because Chicago doesn't want to be another cellar-dweller team last year. They see that this NFC North is absolutely there for the taking. So Chicago's going to want to jump on that opportunity. They're going to want to see some improvement. Even if they end up with like a 7-10 record, 6-11, I think they can live with that. But if they are in this situation here where they are 4-13 again with an 0-6 record in the division, Justin Fields is running around like a madman, still really not doing much to utilize his offensive weapons, they might look in another direction this offseason, especially after they used a top 10 pick on an offensive lineman, especially after they passed up on Bryce Young, CJ Stroud, and Anthony Richardson to double down on Justin Fields. Because you have to think as well, Justin Fields will be eligible for a contract extension after the 2023 season. So if he doesn't have a strong campaign, they might not want to extend him. In fact, they might not even want to pick up his 5th-year option. I know me personally, watching Justin Fields just off of the eye test last year, I was not impressed at all by him as a passer. I know there's certainly a ton of hype around him with his rushing ability, and yes, he is a fantastic rushing quarterback, but until we can see that passing ability as well in the NFL, I'd have a tough time doubling down on him as my franchise quarterback. So before we wrap up here, we'll take a look at the Chicago Bears salary cap allocations for the next few seasons. And as you can see, really not much doing here. Chicago has a ton of salary cap flexibility going forward, much like the Carolina Panthers, team that's probably emerging from a rebuild. I think last year was probably the worst of it for Chicago. The worst is probably behind them. And as we know, Justin Fields locked up for the next minimum 2 seasons, potentially a club option for 2025. Although if he has a rough go about it this year, I wouldn't be inclined to pick that up. The running back position, really not much of an investment here either. Definitely a good sign for them. Wide receiver position, DJ Moore, definitely deserving of that money. His salary is going to actually slightly decrease in 2024 and 2025. And really not much else of an investment there. Darnell Mooney and Chase Claypool are in contract years as well. So if those two players are motivated to produce this year, that could definitely be a good thing for Justin Fields in the offense. But if they don't produce, there's the door. This could be their last year in Chicago. Then looking at the tight end spot, Cole Kmet really the only serious investment here. Just handed, it looks like a 4-year extension at just over 11.5 per season. So Cole Kmet definitely figures to be a part of this picture long term. I think whether that's Justin Fields at quarterback or another young quarterback, he'll be a nice safety blanket option for them. And probably, if there's one player I had to bet that'll be in Chicago long term besides DJ Moore, it's probably Cole Kmet. Looking now at the offensive line, really not too much money tied up here either, so definitely a younger unit. Cody Whitehair signed for the next 2 seasons as a starting guard. Nate Davis signed for the next 3 seasons as the other starting guard. And looking at the tackles, Darnell Wright just on his rookie deal, so he signed for the next 4 years plus potential 5th-year option. Love to see that. And then where is Braxton Jones making absolute peanuts as their starting left tackle for the next 3 seasons. So gives Chicago a ton of cap flexibility to sign Justin Fields to an extension if they wish, or to go out and be aggressive and get another big name player, whether that's at the quarterback position, wide receiver position, or somebody for the defense. And speaking of the defense, we could pull that up here. Really not a ton of money invested here either. On the defensive line, a lot of guys in contract years here. Only player really locked up with a noticeable cap hit long term is DeMarcus Walker for the next 3 seasons, although if they wish to get out of that contract early, that would certainly be possible. And then looking at the linebacker spot, Tremaine Edmonds locked up for the next 4 seasons at significant cap hit, but you figure he's going to be the leader of this defense. That's money well spent. TJ Edwards signed to a noticeable deal here for 3 seasons. Not a bad thing at all. I mean, again, if TJ Edwards, they need to spend that money elsewhere, they could probably get out of that contract too, but he's a solid player. I think he's somebody Chicago will definitely be happy to have on their roster. Then finally, looking at the secondary here, Eddie Jackson with a $17 million cap hit. Not bad at all. Only for the next 2 seasons. You can live with that. Chicago has the room for it. And he was probably their highest producing player on defense last year. And really not much doing besides that. So Chicago is in a very interesting spot here. They are a team that is definitely looking to build, much like the Carolina Panthers. Honestly, I think the Carolina Panthers will probably have a slightly better season than the Chicago Bears. I think for Chicago, it's all about finding out what do you have at the quarterback position this year. That is the biggest question. Is Justin Fields the answer? Okay, we'll extend him, use those future draft capital to build up the defense. If not, okay, we're going to maybe need to use those assets to go out and get our franchise quarterback of the future. Chicago has always struggled with having good play at the quarterback position. I think they're definitely looking to turn the page on that narrative here in 2023 as we go into 2024. So, love to hear anybody's thoughts out there on the Chicago Bears. Is Justin Fields the answer? Is he a fraud? Are the Chicago Bears a threat in the NFC North, or are they going to find themselves near the top of the draft order again next year? That's all I got on the Bears. Have a nice rest of your day, everyone.